I started my career in nuclear in 1986, a time at which if you had a crowd this large, it would not be a pro-nuclear crowd. And the number of young people represented here, I think, is extraordinary. Also, just for folks' historical context, to put it into perspective, New York actually hosts the oldest operating nuclear power plant in the country. It was conceived about the same time I was, and started operations in 1969, having begun the construction in 1965. To go to the comments made earlier by Doreen, that really shows you how these assets can be operated for a really long period of time. And so, what we're doing today really is going to establish a foundation, not just for the people who are here, but for our generations beyond. Um, Having said that, David, I think I sort of look back and I look at the tremendous amount of change that's occurred over the last 5 years. You were involved with a number of things in the Biden administration as deputy secretary. How what do you make right now of where you think nuclear will play in our future energy needs going forward?
Well, let me start, Jeff, with a big thanks to the organizers. And it's great to see so many folks here. And it was really nice to see the show of hands from folks from industry, from policymakers, from academia, just a diverse group here, really powerful group here. And I want to thank you, Jeff, for your public service as well. And we just had such a phenomenal keynote from Doreen, who's been a friend for many years. And for those of you who are New Yorkers, you're incredibly lucky. Doreen is just such a phenomenal leader in so many different ways. And I'd encourage anyone to think about public service. I know this is a bit of a tangent to start, Jeff, but especially with your NRC experience with Doreen's phenomenal public service on behalf of all New Yorkers, it's something that gets maligned more than it should. And so encourage folks to think about that at part of their career. We can make a big difference if we've got folks in public service who have real world experience, who have business experience, who have experience that can help us all move forward, including on nuclear. So I think it's remarkable the progress that we've made. We still have more work to do, and I know we'll get into that with some of the questions, but let me just lay out what I think are four big things that have happened over the last 5 years and even before that as well. First and foremost, and I don't think you can underscore how important this is the strong and growing bipartisan support for nuclear. That is not the case, unfortunately, in our overly polarized world about energy. I'm not sure how energy got so polarized in our country. It used to be the domain of energy nerds like myself and others to just like, how do we get electrons onto the system? How do we think about affordability, reliability, and sustainability? But it's gotten polarized. The bright side for nuclear is it's got strong bipartisan support, and I think growing bipartisan support. And that is to be nurtured, that is to be supported, that is to keep that momentum going forward. Second piece, and this is really a dramatic change from just 5 years ago, is the need for additional electricity in our country. We, for a better portion of 2 decades, have had flat electricity demand in our country. And we're seeing, not just with AI and data centers, the best estimates I've seen are about 50% of our electricity demand are from data centers, of which a part is AI, but there's other electricity growth happening, not just in New York, but across the country. That is a game changer. And I think it's a game changer for nuclear in that, and I've heard this from a lot of folks who've been focused on nuclear for years and years. If you're in a time of flat electricity demand, it's really tough to bring something new on, especially the next generation. And now that we have that additional electricity demand, and hopefully it'll keep going, good electricity demand is a sign of economic progress, is a sign of economic opportunity across our country. I think that's a real game changer, especially for the new nuclear, the small modular reactors, the different types of technologies that we'll talk about here and throughout the day. Third piece is I think we've made some real progress. We collectively, the government, the Department of Energy, has spent a lot of funding on behalf of U.S. taxpayers to try to bring along nuclear technologies. Idaho National Lab is our civilian nuclear national lab. For those who've had a chance to go out there, it's such a phenomenal place. But we've got other tools in our tool belt from the government side. But the entrepreneurs, the companies, the partnerships, and I really want to underscore the partnerships piece, which I think Doreen rightfully made. We have made a lot of progress on technology. We, of course, need to get to the cost issue, and really drive the cost down, and several ideas on that. And then the last piece, which I think has really led into that strong bipartisan support, and it is climate week here, is we need climate solutions. We need climate solutions at scale. We need a diverse range of climate solutions. And for those who take climate seriously, and I would urge everybody to take climate seriously and get our act together, nuclear is a really important part of that mix as well. So I think those four dynamics over the last 5 years, but beyond, I think really set the stage for some real progress.
I like your point. I fully agree with it. I think there has been a tremendous change in the way that folks up in Congress are looking at nuclear energy. Like I said, when I first was a young Senate staffer in 1986, it was a point which that was not the case. It was really probably majority of folks in Congress who were against nuclear. Last year, the Advance Act, which was a major piece of legislation supported by the administration, I know you had a hand in guiding some of that. It passed the United States Senate by a vote of 88-2, the two being, Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey, two senators that are probably 20 years older than I am. And I think that I know I got to be careful not making any knocks. I have great respect for both of them, but you've got somebody like Sheldon Whitehouse, who I think has really made a commitment on behalf of the Democratic Party, and now is the ranking member on the Environment Committee that's really pushing that because of that nexus with climate change. David, I think as I reflect on where things were and where they are now, when I was a commissioner, we were in the first renaissance. You essentially had one type of nuclear power
Yeah,
plant,
yeah.
gigawatt sized plants, and you had one set of potential customers, traditional nuclear regulated utilities. Today, we got a completely different dynamic that faces us. We're still going to build
Yeah.
1,000 megawatt plants, but now we've got a whole range of reactors, roughly 300 megawatts, light water reactors. That's a second, I would call it product line. The third being advanced non-light water reactors, Gen 4,
Yeah.
molten salt, high temperature gas, either lead cooled or sodium cooled. And then, of course, a diversity of microreactor designs out there. And maybe a fifth one would be there are some exotic ones that are coming down the road as well, which I think are kind of interesting. How does that, given that segmentation, how is that going to help incentivize and really facilitate the ability for us as a country to really get our hands around nuclear energy going forward?
I honestly think there's a tension here, and it's something that we're all going to have to navigate together. Part of me is very attracted to a diversity of potential solutions, diversity of entrepreneurs, diversity of companies, diversity of technology options, diversity of players in the market. At the same time, what we need to do, and every one who's a true expert in this field says, Dave, we need to build the order book. We don't just need to do onesie twosies and experiment this and try out this. We need to build the order book. We need to get states working together with the federal government, with hyperscalers, and build the order book so that we can have a pathway to the kind of cost reductions we're going to need to see with any technology so it's more widely adopted. So I think there's a real tension there between the diversity of phenomenal technology solutions, but we are going to have to get to a point where there's some critical mass. It doesn't mean there's only one winner, but I think we need to get to some critical mass, and we need to build that order book so that we can get to that pathway to where we reduce the costs. How exactly we navigate that, I think, is going to have to be, in the best spirits of our country, a pragmatic, very much private-public conversation, really trying to work through that.
Yeah, I agree, and but I do tell people when you think about it in product lines, it's not just we need to have a couple of reactor
Yeah, yeah.
designs. We need to have a couple, two, three reactor designs in each one of those categories ultimately to have a viable market. Um, let me pivot a little bit. Obviously, the conversation here is about New York
Mhm.
and the decision of the governor to move forward. You know, I, Texas makes a lot of noise, and they like, with all due respect to my friends in Texas, they do like hearing each other. But to me, when a state like New York is making a commitment to do nuclear, then I think we've really
Yeah.
arrived. But there are lots of other states out there which are going down that road. Some of them currently have nuclear power plants. Some of them will be new entrants. What's your sense of how that's coming together, and what some of the engagement we need to be having?
So I think it's a big, big deal. And Doreen rattled off some states who are involved with New York. It is a diverse group of states, and I think that's a strength. As I said, the strong bipartisan support, I think, is manifesting itself in the fact that New York, Tennessee, states that have very different politics, that have very different leadership, are finding a very strong solution to a lot of the needs that they have going forward. So I think the fact that governors, different bedfellows, as they say in politics, getting together is a huge, huge opportunity. And as someone who looks across the energy landscape, again, that is not what we see for a lot of technologies. And so we should certainly lean in on that. I really also like what Doreen said, and it just seems to make a lot of common sense. I think it was careful planning, no regrets, and then the collaboration. And I think especially the collaboration piece, it's easier to say collaboration than to actually do collaboration. Public, private, governors working with other governors, the federal government working with state governments. But the stakes are too high here for us not to have that kind of robust, honest collaboration, talking through, working through, trying to align order books, trying to align funding streams, trying to put the pieces together so that we can be successful here. So I think it's quite positive, very positive that we've got so many different governors, so many different states really taking a serious look, and not just taking a look, like actually doing the kinds of steps that Doreen was talking about here in New York.
Well, as a New Englander, the fact that the governors of Connecticut, New Hampshire, Maine, Vermont, Massachusetts are all talking about nuclear is pretty noteworthy,
Hmm.
and quite a different change from where we are. Just so that it's easy to sort of portray everything going the way we want. But there are challenges with some of these reactor designs, particularly some of the advanced reactors that use higher enrichments of fuel, sometimes known as HALEU.
Hmm.
Where do you see that, and are we making the kind of policy changes necessary to enable those fuels for those technologies going forward?
Well, there's no doubt there's challenges, and the supply chain is one of them, not just for HALEU, but to make sure that we've got reliable sources for existing reactors as well. And this is something we spent a lot of time on in the previous administration. I know this administration, rightfully so, is focused on it, again, in a very strong bipartisan way, which is great to have that support. The biggest challenge I saw, especially on HALEU, is just to make sure the supply is on track with the demand and thinking about it holistically. If you build out supply and taxpayers support and fund that supply, but you don't have the demand, then that's not a good place to be. Certainly not a good place to be either if you've got tremendous demand and you've got real opportunities, but you don't have the HALEU. And these are things that can't be turned on like that. This is multi-year efforts, as you well know, Jeff, just to make sure that all of that's in place. So this is going to take some careful planning, careful execution, vector checks along the way, and to make sure that we have that supply and that demand coming on at the same time in a way that allows us to lower costs, allows us to have a coherent plan.
Let me pivot to sort of the back end. So New York also was a leader in recycling of used nuclear fuel up at West Valley. That I think was a mixed record. But there's a whole new generation of leaders here. Carlos from Exodus is one that is looking at
Mhm.
coming up with recycling technologies. Can you talk a little bit about where you see that going? Because that's another area I think there's been a pivot in terms of how people think about that.
Yeah, there has been, and this is where we need really smart people who've made their careers in this space, who understand these issues inside and out, both the upside and the efficiency that you get from recycling to make sure we get the most from our fuels, but also to make sure that we're not doing something that leads to proliferation challenges, waste challenges, other kinds of things as well. One of the strengths and one thing we did in the Biden administration, I hope they're doing it in the second Trump administration, is we brought together not just our nuclear energy office, that's our civilian nuclear office at DOE, as you well know, Jeff, but we brought folks from our NNSA, our nuclear security folks as well, to make sure that we were thinking through all aspects, whether it's recycling or our programs more generally, just to make sure we were thinking holistically, we were red teaming each other, and making sure that we had a coherent strategy going forward. And so, as anything in life, there are balances, there are trade-offs, but I think we can think through the implications and make sure that we're going down a path that, as Doreen said, no regrets.
Let me talk a little bit about it, what is an important topic both for Republicans and Democrats, and that's is for workforce development and the ability to leverage these technologies for greater trade. Historically, the U.S. what has been the real leader in nuclear. I think a lot of folks have been concerned about where Russia and China are in the international trade. Does this give us an opportunity to reassert um, American leadership? Some may say dominance, but I'm going to say leadership in this area. And are there opportunities that you see in in the conversations you've had over the last several years with international counterparts?
Yeah, I prefer the term leadership and partnership myself. So thank you for that, Jeff. I think there's a huge opportunity here. And the Secretary Granholm, spent a lot of time on this. I spent a lot of time on this in Eastern Europe, but frankly, all around the world. I remember one notable meeting in Eastern Europe, and I was making the point about a nuclear relationship being a decades-long relationship. And uh, this gentleman, very distinguished gentleman, was sitting sort of in the back of the room, and he raised his hand, and I said, "Yes, please." And he said, "I just wanted to correct you. It's not a decades-long relationship. It's a generations-long relationship in terms of that working government to government, but with private sector partners as well." I think we stack up quite well. The U.S. brand, the U.S. technology, when you think about it in that generations-long relationship. But we have to live up to that ideal. We as a country, we as our leadership need to live up to that. I think if we do, and it's a real win-win partnership based on mutual trust, confidence, I think we come out really well. I think there's huge opportunities for that. So that's the kind of long-term bipartisan thinking of this with regard to our rest of our foreign policy that I think if we approach it that way, we'll be incredibly successful.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I couldn't agree more. I think when you think from concept to building to operation to shutdown to decommissioning, you're really talking a century.
Yep.
And when I was an NRC commissioner a while back, and we went from 40 years of operation of nuclear power plants to licensing to 60. The NRC has now agreed that we can go to 80. Um, Theoretically, we could go to 100 with a lot of these units. And there is no other power source save perhaps hydropower dams that have a 100-year lifetime, and I think we need to be thinking about it in that regard. One final thing I think I want to touch on, given the fact we are in the financial center of the world in the U.S. Obviously, finances, whether it is trying to get more plants built with our partners abroad or trying to move forward with the plants here, financing is a key element of that strategy. Have you seen that community change in its outlook toward nuclear, and how do you see things going forward?
Yeah, if you ain't got the cash, you're not going to get it done, right? Like that's how our
Have the juice.
that's how our system works. And I think we have to have working together pathways to show the cost reduction. That it's not just onesie twosies, but it's 10, it's dozens of plants as well. And I think when you talk to private equity and other folks who deal with a lot of money, like they get excited if you show a pathway, if you have that credible pathway, that a lot of money can be made and a lot of energy security, reliability, and carbon-free power as well. So I have seen strong interest. I think there's a lot that we all bipartisan are doing that's good on that front. I think there's some things we need to watch out for as well. One thing that makes me nervous is, a thousand times more about the NRC than I do. I get really nervous, and I think a lot of folks get really nervous about attempts to do away with the independence of the NRC. I think that's a terrible idea, and I think if you want to undercut financiers' interests and others' interests in nuclear, like get rid of the independence of the NRC. Doesn't mean that the NRC can't be improved. It doesn't mean that we need to make sure we have the staffing and support so that they have the bandwidth to deal with all this diversity of technology and doing it the right way. So I think we need to, as policymakers, continue to build confidence for the long haul, especially because nuclear is that century-long process, including from investors, right? That's how they need to see it as well. So I think there is some traction, some momentum. The other thing I'd say too that is challenging, and this is part of, I think, the challenge of our politics that swings so far back and forth these days, is a lot of investors with so much business uncertainty out there are looking for things that are near term, quick, and easier. And so I think we need to have hopefully more durable policy, more durable politics, so that we can have those more longer term horizons on the investment side of things. And I think that'll really help nuclear, among other things, too, infrastructure more generally in our country.
Yeah, you said a bunch of things I agree with. First off, I really appreciate our conversation. We've done this on several other occasions, and it's always a great opportunity to interact. I tell people sometimes not all energy assets are the same. If you need to house a family of five, there are prefab homes you can buy that'll be built and can be done relatively inexpensively.
Mhm.
You can buy a brick colonial that'll last for 2 centuries. And me, I'd rather have something that's going to last two
Yep.
centuries and have that reliability. So, like you, I have seen that pivot in finance, and I think we're moving
Yep.
there.
Yep.
But I don't want to miss the last one you entered, which is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission.
Yep.
One of the things that I've said to people is having an independent regulator, and I served as a Republican in a Democratic administration and then a second term in a Republican administration. One of the benefits of having a five-member commission is the lack of that pendulum swing.
Yeah.
The pendulum swing is much narrower.
Yep.
When we go from very different administrations, that swing can be quite large. And if you're making investments, multi-billion-dollar investments they're going to really mature over a decade. Having wide pendulum swings isn't really going to encourage people to have that kind of investment. Now, having said that, I think the agency, because of the Advance Act, did make a pivot. I think it needed to make changes. It was too slow. It was too conservative. It did not really enable the kind of technologies that we're having right now. I think that is changing. Certainly, I think some of the things that have happened over the last 6 months, could be helpful, but there is a risk
Yep.
of going too far. And I think, my caution on that is someone who really wants the agencies succeed and this industry succeed is really be thoughtful about those
Yep.
changes. So.
Completely agree.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we'll bring this to a close. Great conversation. I'm sure there's a lot more we could have covered, but there's a lot for others to cover today. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you all for having us.